Okay, that's about it for intro. Let's talk about news now. And first of all, as headline says of this news segment, Russian spy agency, foreign intelligence agency, yet again shared with the public information about plans on a terrorist activity that is being generated in UK among British intelligence community, among British political elites, and RT and many other media outlets are reporting about it, of course. RT's headline is that UK is furious over failed Russia strategy, spy agency. So let's go through details here. Britain is furious over its failure to bring about the strategic defeat of Russia and is preparing new provocations in response to battlefield gains in Ukraine conflict, battlefield gains of Russian armed forces. Moscow's Foreign Intelligence Service, SVR, has warned in a statement on Monday, that is today, the SVR claimed that UK's secret services have resorted to preparing a group of Russian nationals who fight for a Kiev regime to sabotage either Ukrainian vessel or foreign civilian vessel in European port, after which London would accuse Moscow of orchestrating this attack. Foreign Intelligence Service also claimed that the group would leave behind them Chinese-made underwater equipment, which would later be presented as a proof of Beijing's support for Russia. London expects Europe's Russophobic elites to use the fake narrative to justify further military aid to Ukraine and the greater militarization against Russia. The spy agency said Russia's leadership, dear friends, considers the UK, as you know, one of the most hostile Western states. Relations between the two countries have only worsened since the escalation of the Ukraine conflict in 2022. London has imposed multiple rounds of sanctions on Russian banks, energy exports, and individuals, while expanding military aid to include long-range Storm Shadow missiles and training for the Kiev regime's forces. So yet another warning from Russian spy agency, Foreign Intelligence Agency, about terrorist plans that London has. And while being warned, one should be prepared also, as one say goes. And maybe this revelation from Russian intelligence community will have some influence on the plans of London, and maybe they will skip whatever terrorist activity they had in plans, right? We will find out soon, I guess. Also, dear friends, when it comes to hostility of the Western world towards Russia, it's not just the political class, but you might be surprised, maybe, but Western so-called media is no any less. Of course, this so-called media is operating under their strict control of Western secret services, so we should not be surprised, really. But nevertheless, it is interesting that Politico, this American media outlet, formerly media outlet, basically began creating yet another false narrative to call then NATO countries to take some action against Russian so-called shadow fleet. And so, according to Politico, tankers carrying Russian oil are polluting waters off the coast of Europe. Tankers of European countries they're okay, but they do no wrong, or any other vessels. But tankers carrying Russian oil, that not necessarily might be the Russian whatsoever, are polluting waters off the coast of Europe. That's their headline here. Let's go into details. So despite Western sanctions, at least 5 Russian tankers have continued to sail unimpeded in the European waters over the past year following oil spills, highlighting their insufficiencies of controls on the shadow fleet, Politico reports. Since when Politico became an institution that tracks activities of other navies and demands some measures to be taken? What the hell is going on here? It's a legit question, isn't it? Since when Politico become some military wing of NATO or something like that? Anyways, let's continue here. Russian oil tankers continue to dump oil off European shores despite Western sanctions, Politico reports. According to joint investigation by Politico and group source material, over the past year, at least 5 Russian vessels from the so-called Shadow Fleet have left oil spills but continue to navigate European waters unimpeded. 2 of these vessels were already subject to individual UK sanctions. Among them was the tanker Dynasty, which left 12 kilometers sleek in Spanish waters in November 2024, while under London sanctions. Following the incident, the EU also blacklisted it. Experts, so-called experts, know that the deteriorating conditions of the vessels and their opaque ownership structure increases the risk of accidents, while the lack of insurance due to sanctions complicates the identification and the prosecution of those responsible. Latvian Energy Minister Chihuahua from Baltics, Kaspars Melnis, called the problem enormous, and experts warn that the cost of the cleaning up a major spill could reach 1.4 billion euros. In response to new incidents, the EU is expanding its sanctions list to include an additional 118 Russian vessels in September 2024. However, experts and the EU representatives consider this measure insufficient and propose tightening controls not only on vessels but also on the entire shipping chain, including oil refineries, insurance companies, and flag registries. France and other countries have called on the military and NATO to take joint action against suspicious vessels, and that's the key point here, isn't it, by the way? That's the key point. All this article of Politico, all this so-called investigation is about this pushing this narrative that NATO should take some action. And that's why I asked in the beginning, since when Politico become a tool, an official tool, it seems like, of NATO, spearhead of the NATO. This is not what journalists should do, I believe, right? But nevertheless, dear friends, just a couple of days ago, we have seen piracy on part of France when they, for a couple of days, detained a vessel that allegedly was carrying Russian oil. That was not the first incident. There was a number of incidents before that, and I'm afraid there will be a number of incidents after that, under whatever false pretext, by the way, that Russian tankers or tankers that are linked to Russia are leaving oil spill and they're doing this and that. But in reality, we all know what is going on, isn't it? NATO countries, globalists and globalist control regimes in the collective West want to shut down Baltic Sea for Russian Federation. They want to do the same in the Northern Sea through English Channel, and they might try to do so in the Mediterranean also. And that means Moscow's warnings have not been listened, and probably soon we will see Russian military vessels escorting caravans of their tankers or other type of vessels that are directly or indirectly linked to Russia. And let's see what NATO countries will dare to do when these convoys of vessels are escorted by Russian battleships. But they're gonna try to escalate. And until they've been checked, right? Until they've been forced to act adequately, they will continue escalation. We all know that because globalist control regimes in the Western world, they have no, and their allies have no reverse gear. They cannot help themselves. They cannot stop. They have to be forced to act accordingly, and Russia will do it. One day, one way or another, but Russia will force Western so-called elites to come to their senses, face the reality, no matter how painful that reality might be for them, right? Acknowledge defeat in this proxy war that they launch against Russia and basically capitulate. And after that, things might get better. Anyways, let's continue, dear friends. And as I said, until Russia will force Western so-called elites to capitulate, they're not gonna de-escalate. Only further provocations to be expected. And therefore, no one should be surprised that according to EU Defense Commissioner Andrius Kubilius, Germany has evidence that Russia is discussing an attack on NATO. How interesting, isn't it? For how many years we have heard that Russia is planning to attack NATO? Russia is planning to attack this country of NATO and that country. And how come that until now Russia did not actually attack? How interesting, isn't it? But narrative has to go on, right? Narrative has to go on, and EU bureaucrats doing just that, pushing for these false narratives. And allegedly, Germany has evidences even that Russia is discussing an attack on NATO, which is, if we go through some thought process, only way Russia will attack any NATO country is if provoked, right? And you think why Moscow was warning so many times NATO countries? Why Moscow was warning and continues to warn Western countries or NATO member states to act adequately? Exactly because Moscow wants to avoid confrontation, right? Otherwise, why would you warn your enemy? You will just wait for an opportunity and then strike, right? But no, Russia wants to avoid escalation with NATO. Russia wants to avoid military confrontation. And that's why so many warnings are coming from Moscow. But no one, unfortunately, is listening in the West, among Western elites, right? And so therefore, theoretically speaking, is it possible that one day Russian Federation, Russian militaries might actually take some action against their military and logistical infrastructure of NATO countries? Yes, theoretically speaking, that is possible. When this attack might happen, or will this type of attack happen unprovokedly? No, absolutely impossible. Then when this attack might happen, another question can rise. And the answer is when Western elites will go ahead with the next phase of escalation against Russia. And I did spoke about what I mean by this next phase of escalation. I'm quite sure that I have enough, good enough reading of the big picture based on all the indicators that we are seeing to claim that, in my personal opinion, globalist control regimes in the West, first of all in Europe, by the way, are planning next phase of escalation with Russia, which will mean potentially combined attack when simultaneously NATO countries and their proxy regime in Kiev will attempt decapitation strike on Russia, strike on Russian political and military leadership, that is, simultaneous large-scale, unprecedented scale drone and missile strikes deep into Russian Federation. Simultaneously, NATO countries and their proxy Kiev regime will use most of their assets that they probably have on Russian territory to conduct large-scale terrorist attacks. And same time, we should expect a large-scale, unprecedented scale cyber attack on Russian infrastructure. That's what I mean by mentioning this next phase of escalation. And I'm afraid globalists and their allies gonna launch this assault on Russia, combined assault on Russia in a relatively short time. And once this will happen, if this will happen, Moscow definitely can and most likely will retaliate with such a force and scale that probably whole world will be shocked. Not just the globalists themselves and their proxies or their puppets in governments of all these Western countries, but the whole world probably will be shocked. But what you expect, by the way, Moscow was exercising restraint for a year, another year, third year. It's fourth year now. At one point, Moscow will say enough is enough. Let's teach them a lesson now. And as a response on the next phase of escalation, Moscow probably will take action against military and logistical infrastructure of NATO countries too. But yet again, that will be a retaliatory strike. As I already said, Moscow in no circumstances will attack unprovokedly, right? And that's exactly why Moscow is still to nowadays issuing warnings towards NATO members not to escalate any further, right? That's my comment on this topic, dear friends. Let's continue with some other news. And all these weeks, topic of unidentified drones all over Europe is being actively discussed. False flag after false flag operation is conducted there, and the former Russian president and current deputy chairman of the Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, commented on that. And let me, dear friends, read the comment of the Medvedev. It's quite a big comment, but I think interesting one. You might agree with him or not, but comment itself is quite interesting, and I will show you on the screen, dear friends. Hopefully image will be good enough so that you can pause the video and read this comment if you want to. But I will read this comment, if I may, just in case quality of photo is not good enough. And so let's go through Medvedev's comments here. So Dmitry Medvedev on the recent European drone hysteria. And this is, rest is in quotes, by the way. European cities have been hit by an epidemic of UFD, or unidentified flying drones. UFs or drones are everywhere, near the military bases, at airports, in the fields, and over cities. Whose they are is unclear. What are their terrorists? Medvedev is asking. First, provocations by banderites aimed at improving arms supplies and provoking war. Second, activities of pro-Russian underground groups in these countries aimed at destabilizing life in the EU. Third, testing the resilience of their air defense systems conducted by local special services. False flag, basically. Fourth, local hooligans playing around with their mischievous intentions. Fifth, direct drone deployment from Russia. Which theories are plausible then? Medvedev is asking. The first is quite likely, although the part of their typical UAV can usually be tracked. A lot of senseless Ukro avoiders, he's talking about deserters, by the way, live in Europe. Launching drones in Europe is safer than on the front line. So according to Medvedev, first point can be the truth that this is basically provocation by Kyiv regime to further enhance Westerners to send more money and more weapons, and also potentially to provoke even a wider war. What about second point? Medvedev is saying that second theory is theoretically also possible, but still doubtful. People sympathetic to our country will not waste their resources in vain by coming out of their underground. Our agents and the moles, in the quotes, by the way, are waiting for a separate command. And he is, of course, somewhat sarcastic here, and same time not really sarcastic, because obviously it's not just Western secret services that do have some assets probably on Russian territory. Russian security services also have assets in Western countries. But yet again, Medvedev is saying that, well, it is highly unlikely that it's either our supporters or our actual assets, because it does not worth it, right? The third explanation, Medvedev says, yes, special services and national armed forces in the West must check their readiness to repel drone attacks. This theory is workable, according to Medvedev. So he did not use the false flag terminology, but that's what his statement basically means, that all these drone stories are false flag operations staged by Western secret services for whatever reason, to further increase pressure on the public that is already being terrorized by this non-existent Russian threat, right? Which allows Western elites to basically allocate whatever sums they want from taxpayers to any pocket they like, right? Also, there can be some other reasons too. For example, just to check at least how ready this or that NATO member state is to deal with the drone situation. But anyways, this theory, third one, is being called workable by Medvedev, and yes, I will agree with him on that. When it comes to fourth theory, Medvedev is writing, of course, local idlers can fool around by launching drones. Why not annoy their bureaucrats? Good way. So yes, it is also possible that at least in some cases, locals that don't really have much to do, I guess, are using these drones to make some noise, right? And annoy officials and everyone else, right? Possible, for sure. Fifth theory was quite extensively commented on during the Valdai discussion by the president of Russia. There is nothing to add here, and his words also correlate with the fourth theory. In fact, the causes of their panic around the Russian drones could be any of the reasons given or combination of them. The main thing is not that. The main thing is that the short-sighted European elites feel on their own skin what the danger of a war is, that they fear and tremble like stupid animals in a herd being driven to their slaughter, that they soil themselves with their fear, anticipating their near and painful end. So here Medvedev goes, of course, all in his statement, and then he continues, dear friends. Maybe, he said, maybe then they will understand what war is and tear their heads off their freaks like Merz and Macron, who make money and the political points on blood, Medvedev said. And I think his comment is interesting, dear friends, because he went through several scenarios here, and he acknowledged that some are plausible, some are not, and so on. Right? Share what your take is, dear friends. What you think these drones are coming from? Me personally, I have some doubts that those drones have anything to do with the Russian Federation. In my opinion, this is all in main part false flag operations, and I would not exclude the possibility that some people in Europe that really don't really have much to do are also using the drones to just annoy everyone, right? But mainly, I think it's a false flag operations. Hello everyone, I hope you find informative and useful this short clip from main news update, and if so, please click that like button and leave some commentary just about anything. It might help to deal with the algorithm and reach wider audience. And if you like my work in general and want to support to save this media project, you can assist through several ways. You can donate to this project through PayPal platform or Boosty, also with crypto currencies. Or you can subscribe to my Patreon page and page on Boosty, where I have quite a lot of extra content on regular basis. All the links are on this video in description box and in the pinned comment. And of course, many thanks to everyone who already helped and continues to support. Thank you.